Welcome back to Breakfast at Stinsons. This is John Asher Thompson, and today we have a very special guest, my dad, the original John Asher Thompson. Some of the highlights, he was a pilot. He flew over 220 missions in Vietnam, so hero in his own right, not just in my mind. And a great dad, husband, and thrilled to have him today. So stay with us, Breakfast at Stinsons, and please subscribe. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and I think several other platforms. I'm here today with a Vietnam vet, an American hero, a cancer survivor, a man struggling with Parkinson's, a father of two, a husband of how many years? Over 50. And my dad. We like to call him the original John Asher Thompson. This is John Asher Thompson, and I'm here to talk to my dad today. So welcome.
Well, thank you.
I'd love to start by just getting you to talk a little bit about your life, and just you can give a high-level summary. We'll dive back in. We'll circle back, but I would love for you to tell, a brief summary of your life as you would describe it.
Well, it is kind of interesting how the direction that my life went because of certain things that happened about the time of my birth. Because I was born, my dad was in the Navy, and he was on a ship in the Pacific, and I've never really gotten this straight, but I think the ship was kamikaze, and he ended up in the water, and it messed up. He was a naval officer, and he loved the Navy, and it affected his breathing, and so he was medically discharged from the Navy. And I was born in New Orleans while he was kind of passing through, and my mother had just gone there from Lubbock, Texas. Anyway, I'll explain why that's so relevant.
And because we might have some listeners who aren't up on history, that would be World War II. Yeah,
World War II, and my dad was I think a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and in the heat of the battle. Except he was on a supply ship. I mean, he wasn't an attack ship or anything. But because of that, my learning later that he loved the Navy, I think he behind the scenes, without my knowing it, kind of did a lot toward directing my life so I'd end up in the Navy one day. If he had told me that's what he was doing, I'd have rebelled against it. So. Anyway, we moved back to Lubbock, and just started a.
And what was your dad's name? My grandfather.
Asher James Thompson.
Okay.
We moved back to Lubbock, and my dad went into business with my grandfather in insurance, and then he turned it into more of an investment banker company. And it was a typical West Texas town, kind of. Small. I used to call it the largest small town in the world because that's what it felt like that movie. What was the movie? I can't remember the name of it. It was like, anyway. It's just where we
play pinball.
Played the pinball machine with Buddy Holly. By the way.
They're building a big Buddy Holly event center today. I think it's like $100 million, and they're going to call it the Buddy Holly something or other.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So you played pinball with Buddy Holly, or you watched him play?
Well, I played with him in the crickets.
Did you really?
Yeah, they'd come back to town.
Wow.
But he was a couple years ahead of me in school, and he, I see him around. I saw him win an amateur contest at the local theater, just by himself, him and his guitar. Before anybody knew of him.
Do you remember, was he playing one of his songs that's famous today, or no idea?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that to say, it was kind of a typical West Texas, I don't know how to describe it exactly, upbringing. And my dad was an alcoholic, which colored everything. I mean, I don't like to say that, but it's true. So we had a lot of problems, obviously. And I was very rebellious. I made good grades. That's the only thing I did right. And so just to cut to the chase, as far as the Navy thing, which really gave me the direction for my life.
Can we talk about Lubbock real quick? I've got a couple things.
Sure.
Because you were a boxer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
I mean, I did box.
I think that makes you a boxer,
Yeah.
or made you a boxer. Can you talk just really briefly about, because I find this fascinating, about how you box in the Golden Gloves, and just one or two little stories about what you did and who you fought and how you did it and when that was. It was 50s, I guess.
It's funny, yeah. My dad is a part of this scheme that has gone on my whole life that I didn't know about.
When did you discover the scheme? When did it dawn on you?
After I was at the Naval Academy.
Okay.
It was really funny to look back. But he sent me to Culver Military Academy for 3 summers for the Navy part.
Where's
school.
Culver?
It's in Indiana.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where. I've forgotten, but it's Culver, Indiana. And it was a military deal, and it's like the rebellious kid being sent off to summer camp, like reform school. But it was just a bunch of normal kids, and we had a great time. Had some met a lot of good friends and all that. But later, I realized how much I had learned there, and when I was at the Naval Academy, that was helpful, but it was all part of my dad's deal. I thought he was just getting rid of me for the summers.
Maybe it was the blue hair. We'll have to come back to that.
Yeah, he had a plan.
How do you feel about the blue hair? Did it send you to Culver when he came home with the blue hair that time? Or was it green?
No, that was part of when I was in the 8th grade.
You were way ahead of your time, by the way.
Yeah.
The 8th grade, you would have been, you were born 1942, so this would have been about 1955, I'm guessing. So you had blue hair in 1955?
Well, I was in the 8th grade, and I dyed it black.
Oh.
but it splotched on my skin, and it didn't look too good, so I peroxided it. and it turned green.
Okay.
And so I got kicked out of school for 3 days, and I had to get it shaved off, and I had to wear a knit cap for a while. I don't remember details, but
yeah,
that's one of my escapades.
Yeah. And the next summer you ended up at Culver. Oh, no wonder.
Yeah. And, the neighbors thought I'd end up in prison. Some of them. I mean, they really did. I mean, I'd bust out windows and steal bicycles. I'd get my dad's car out in the middle of the night, and it was crazy. I had a paper route, and I'd run alongside his car and throw the papers. Nobody's in the car. The car's just running.
Oh, gosh.
So
small town, the 50s. I mean, it's anyway, I love thinking about that. But okay, so go ahead. So we're at Culver and boxing.
So I just got into boxing. I just took boxing as one of the classes or courses or whatever they call it, and really learned to box pretty well. I had a really good coach, and I was pretty good there. I mean, at that level.
Becca, my dad was my boxing coach, by the way, as a kid.
In high school, I was on the golf team, and I wanted to do something a little tougher, so I got into Golden Gloves, and they didn't have Golden Gloves in Lubbock, which is very interesting because they had it in Level Land, which is 20 miles away or so, but it's a much smaller town than Lubbock. But they had Golden Gloves there, and I used to go up. I don't remember how long it lasted, but over a period of time, I'd go up every Friday night and fight. And
how'd that go?
Oh, at first it was pretty rough because I really got beat up by some kids that were a lot tougher than me. So anyway, but I did learn to box pretty well there, and kind of the hard way in a way. So later at the academy, I boxed, that, so. But I was no star. I had aspirations to go to the Olympics, but that didn't turn out.
Okay.
But I was pretty good, but not a champion.
Yeah.
So
we can talk. Okay, sorry, we got a little bit sidetracked there, but I just wanted to get some color on Lubbock, growing up in Lubbock, Texas, in the 1950s, and Buddy Holly. So you can keep going here on the bio.
Well, in January of 1961, I got we didn't have cell phones, and the school office called me out of class and said, your dad's on the phone, wants to talk to you. So I went to the office, and he said.
And you were a senior that year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So January
of my senior year.
High school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he said, the congressman's in town. How would you like to try to go to the Naval Academy? And I was already set up to go to Texas Tech, but I had no direction whatsoever. I mean, I had no ambition really. You know, I was kind of wandering through life. And so I said, sure. And George Mahon was our congressman, and I competed against some other guys. Just took some tests and stuff, and in June I was there.
Wow.
And it was quite. I wasn't one of those guys that dreamed about it all my life. So that was kind of a shock.
So what? Just out of curiosity, like what do you think your response? Not that you know exactly what the words were, but when your dad said, "Would you like to go to the Naval Academy?" What did you? Were you?
Well, having no direction, I just said sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he said, "Would you like to try to go?" So I said sure, and then then we just started the process with the congressman, and I was there like 5-6 months later.
Talk about that transition. So you go from West Texas to Annapolis, Maryland, and you either specifically or emotionally or what was that like? So 1961, I can't imagine, or maybe I can, but like today, if you live in Lubbock, Texas, you can catch a Southwest flight to Baltimore and be in Annapolis, and it's no big deal. 1961, I'm thinking it was a pretty different transition experience.
Yeah, I think I took the train first time. I took the train to Culver. I remember that. I'm not completely sure, but I ended up after a while flying back and forth typically out of Dulles in Washington. But I think I took the train the first time I went. My parents didn't go with me, but they knew somebody up there who met me and kind of helped me.
And what were your first impressions? Because you'd never been, I presume, over to that side of the country. Had you been to D.C. or anything over there on the East Coast?
Nope.
So your first time, you've committed the next 4 years of your life, sight unseen, to Annapolis, Maryland. What were your first impressions when you arrived up there?
Well, I wasn't really awed or anything. It's just kind of what I was doing. I really had very little direction, and I just had no. Here I am at the Naval Academy. Let's get on with it. But that's when I found out how much Culver helped me prepare for that, and I didn't know. I had 2 roommates, and there's so many stories. But
you can pick a couple. I'd love to hear. Some.
I had never seen a soccer ball.
Yeah,
and they both. One was from California, and one was from New York, maybe New England. I'm not sure. And they went out for soccer, plebe summers, and so I did too. I'd never seen a soccer ball, so I played soccer for three years on the JVs, as freshman JV, and it was never any good, but it kept me out of trouble. It was really good to have a sport, and it was a varsity sport, so I didn't have to sit at the tables all the time with the upperclassmen who harass you through the meals.
Yeah, what was that like? I'm sure it's a little more genteel. What was that like to be a plebe?
It was pretty rough. And there's a joke that's been going on for decades, and that is, I meet somebody who's, class of '85 or something, and I'll say, I'm class of '65, back when we had a plebe year.
Yeah.
So the joke is always that your plebe year was worse than theirs. Yeah. But it really was worse back then as far as physical stuff. But
can you talk? What just a couple of examples of what that 1961 when you start? What'd you do?
Plebe summer was a little different because they're just kind of really back then they were trying to kind of get rid of people that didn't belong. So they were really pretty tough on us, and we just did a lot of exercises and stuff. But we'd as time went on into plebe year, we'd sit at a table with there'd be a first classman at one end and a second classman at the other end, maybe a couple of them, and then there'd be a couple of youngsters. That's the second year, and then there'd be about 4 or 5 plebes on each table, and the plebes had to brace up and eat like this, bring it
with your head back, and you got to bring your fork or spoon
in. And they would give you questions, one meal to answer the next meal, like all the ships, all the aircraft carriers in the 27 Charlie series or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already got all our schoolwork, homework, and all that. So it's pretty brutal because we'd go play a sport or something, and everybody did something in the afternoon. So to have to do that and then prepare for the meal when you hardly even get to eat, and you've got all these questions you got to answer. But playing soccer, I remember I got on the training table some where you didn't have to sit with the firsties, they called them, and could have a little leisure meal. But I remember at a noon meal one time when I was at the regular tables, and I was just being a plebe and a first class guy at my table wanted me to just learn a whole bunch of stuff by dinner time, and it was overwhelming. And I went and played soccer that day, and I think I broke my ankle or sprained it badly. But if you ever got hurt there with any severity that had to do with mobility, you typically would just go to the hospital because there wasn't any place for you to go. So I went to the hospital for 3 weeks or something like that.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't have to answer that guy's questions.
There you go. One of the just while we're talking, I want to, the Vietnam War was starting to heat up when you were there, and we'll get into that. And I think the other interesting thing to me growing up is that you were in the same class with Roger Staubach. And we don't have to spend a lot of time. Maybe he'll come on the podcast at some point. That'd be great. But he was in your class, and I was always interested to hear just how different college sports were back then. So quickly, can you talk about his experience and maybe the difference as you see it, like what his life was like, which I find really fascinating as a first year, clearly a high profile guy, even as a freshman, was obviously a star quarterback for them, became the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. What was that like for him?
Well, I didn't know personally back then, but he was in the 16th Company, which was had a reputation for being the toughest company in the whole brigade. And they were trying to run people off, and there were people specifically that tried to run him off, and just make everything so hard on him, because I'm sure he was at the training tables most of the time. Didn't have to sit at the table with the firsties and second class guys. I mean, I know I've talked to him after that, and he didn't really talk about it, but I know it was pretty rough. 16th Company really was rough. I mean, they ran a lot of people off.
They didn't care. They didn't care if he was going to win the Heisman Trophy or not. They had different priorities. Yeah,
I mean, it was just a matter of this guy's getting away with murder. He's not having to sit at the table with and But he's a good guy, and he was probably just did his stuff, and he was in another wing for me. I didn't know him until later, but.
And wasn't Bill Belichick's dad a coach there at that time?
Yeah, Bill. Yeah, Steve Belichick.
I don't remember. Patriots head coach dad.
Yeah,
interesting times.
Yes, yeah. In fact, he grew up at the academy, or part of his growing up years.
Yeah. That's always so interesting. Well, were you guys aware of? Was the Vietnam War on your mind as you got towards graduation? Was that something? Obviously, when you got out, but what was that like being as that situation heated up? You're at the military academy. Were you guys just sort of always cognizant that that's going on and that was what your destiny was going to be, or did you guys just sort of have a college experience and the war's going on, or were you actually preparing and thinking about, hey, I'm going to be going to war?
It was more the way you described it, as far as just kind of day at a time. I graduated in '65, and it started really heating up about then. Not much before that. We lost. The first POW was shot down. Pilot POW was shot down in Alvarez in '64, but we didn't hear much about the war. At least I didn't. I was just doing the schoolwork and and playing. I played. I boxed at the academy, and it was a varsity sport. I played a little lacrosse, but I was busy with sports, and and we had more free time as the time went by, and had girlfriends and just normal stuff.
What does the Pierre Hotel in New York City mean to you? And do you have a story that goes with that?
I don't know if I twisted this. I don't know that there is a story about Anne Margaret and all that.
Oh, I don't know. I just remember your good friend David, and maybe your sophomore year, or you were having a rough go at Annapolis, and Asher said, "Why don't you come to New York?" And you ended up at the Pierre.
Oh, I think that's when I was dating some girl, and if that's what you call it, she dumped me. I think that's what you're talking about. And it's the only time I ever really wanted to leave. I was so heartbroken. It was just, my life was just awful.
Was this your sophomore year?
Yeah. I endured the whole plebe year.
The worst part. You survived the worst part.
Yeah, and then
the weather. You used to talk about the weather was so different, right? Lubbock, of course. Lubbock is so
humid,
hot, but humid.
Terribly humid, and the other. As far as the war, I mean, the 3 summers that I was there, we had one summer we focused on aviation, one summer they focused on marine stuff, and slogging through the jungle or through the beach waters or something. We had a cruise on 2 cruises in those 3 summers that they worked in there somehow. And so I was on a World War II submarine one summer.
How'd you like that?
It was a diesel sub from World War II. I didn't like it. I mean, it was terrible. It was just terrible. However, I met a great guy, an enlisted guy there that we became great friends, and he lived in Long Island somewhere in New York. And so I'd go, we'd pull into port up there, and I'd go mess around with him, So.
You told a funny story about some music that you listened to. I think you went to a concert in New York area, and then I think you mentioned something down in D.C. I forget, but just very quickly touch on, just for fun, because this is like 1963, who you saw and just quick recollection of those times.
Well, I saw the Beatles in Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in New York, and that was an experience that you can't even describe.
Was Ringo there, was that before Ringo?
Yeah, Ringo was there.
Oh, okay.
They flew them in a helicopter and landed. It's an open stadium, and you couldn't get within 2 blocks of the stadium without a ticket. And I never heard a single word that they sang because everybody was screaming the whole time. And girls were passing out. I mean, passing out right in front of me. The girl just passed out. It was unbelievable. And I don't know how much you want to know about it, but I was dating a girl who dumped me basically, and we had arranged the Beatles tickets, so she had them. So, and I didn't have a call. I mean, I didn't have any way to get around really, so I had to negotiate to get the tickets so we could go, and then I took somebody else. It was just kind of funny. And I saw Chuck Berry in Virginia Beach.
That's amazing.
Doing the chicken walk that he does,
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. We were talking about the Pierre, and you and David Miller and Asher giving you guys an opportunity to come stay at the Pierre. You wanted to leave because a girl had dumped you and you were heartbroken, and you wanted to leave the Naval Academy. And then you got a phone call or something, Asher.
Yeah.
So do you remember, you've told me this a few times about getting to New York and staying at the Pierre. Do you remember that?
I remember doing it. I don't remember the details, though.
Oh, okay. Well, you told me some fun stories about you and David in New York, and he gave you passes to the clubs and going to the Pierre, and then you hitchhiked down to Florida, and you did just some of those kind of anecdotes.
Oh, gosh, yeah. We went down one summer. We were off 30 days in the summers.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can't remember which was which, but one summer, another classmate and me, hitchhiked across the country, and we were trying to go all the way up to Seattle, and we went down to Florida, and I don't remember all that we did, but it was crazy. But the interesting one is Bill Weiler and I, who's a good friend, hitchhiked. We were going to go to the Bahamas, And so we hitchhiked down to Florida, and I think probably it's Fort Lauderdale, not sure, and just hung around until we found a private plane that was flying to the Bahamas, and got a ride with the guy.
Yeah.
And just went over there, and then we were wearing our uniforms, and we went to a real ritzy hotel. I mean, we were staying in a dump. We went to a real ritzy hotel and met some girls and met their parents, and they just sort of took us in.
You wore your uniform?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
That probably went a long way.
it went a long ways. and they fed us, and
Yeah.
And then we got a military flights back, and then I hitchhiked back to Lubbock.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, but that's back in. I mean, it was a totally different day. But we hitchhiked in our uniforms.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how that would go over today, but boy,
Yeah.
it was not.
Easy to get a ride back then in the uniforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't always get a ride with who you liked to, though.
Right. Well, let's come back to the. You started on the how you ended up. You ended up flying, so you knew you didn't want to be on subs. But let's fast forward to your senior year. You ended up in an airplane. So how'd you get there? How'd you end up flying for the Navy?
Well, in the spring of senior year, we picked what we wanted to do based on our class standing, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be on a submarine. I didn't want to be on the destroyer, and I didn't want to be a Marine.
Right.
And so I picked flying and loved it. And then I wanted to fly jets, but you didn't pick jets then. You just picked flying.
Let me ask you a question. You started with, you got to Annapolis without direction in your life. You didn't, sure. But clearly by your senior year, you at least knew what you didn't want to do, and you knew some things that you wanted to do, like fly jets.
Yeah.
Did you think about much in terms of, would you say that your life had more direction, or was sort of picking up steam, or you started, the Naval Academy gave you direction? How would you, and we'll come back to this as you get older, because I know your story, but just you said, hey, I want to fly jets. Did you feel like the Naval Academy, did it provide that direction? Did it provide direction for your life? Did it?
Yeah, but I don't think I thought very deeply about anything. I was just kind of having a good time in a way. And I always made good grades, and that's just what saved me. But as far as, just to tell you where my young mind was, immature mind, when Kennedy was shot, President Kennedy.
Mm-hmm. November of '63, so you would have been your junior year. Is that right?
Yeah. I remember, I was concerned about it. It was a big deal. I knew that. But my main concern is that I had a date with a girl from Massachusetts for the Army-Navy game. And they were talking about canceling the Army-Navy game. That's what I was concerned about.
Right.
It's just totally immature and silly. But, a lot of it, of course, was very serious. But we didn't, it's like, I always said, and a lot of others too, I'm sure, that the Naval Academy is a great place to be from, but you don't really enjoy being there.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of confined.
Yeah.
But, it was a great experience for me. But it's better now. I can look back and say I'm from there, and don't live there. But it just set a direction for my life. But by that I don't mean a way of thinking so much, but just what I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go try to get a real estate job or or be a manager of a Wendy's or something.
So you'd fly jets instead.
Yeah, I would just fly airplanes. They sent us to Pensacola. I had some great friends.
Before you went to teach you didn't Pensacola. You went to Beeville. Is that right? You went to Beeville.
I went to Pensacola first.
You went to Pensacola first. Okay.
Had a month or so of classroom training, and then we started flying in the T-34, and soloed at some point. Once they determined that we were okay to go on, then we depended on our class standing in that little deal about whether we got jets or props. And I picked jets, and so they sent me to Meridian, Mississippi, and that's where I learned to fly jets. And landed on a carrier.
Wow.
Yeah, on the Lexington, which I think you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Then the advanced jet deal was in Beeville.
Okay.
So I went to that, and that's the airplane the Blue Angels were flying at the time, the F-11. It's pretty cool. So it was supersonic.
You learned to fly in a supersonic plane?
Yeah, we and the Blue Angels had the only F-11 squadrons that existed. So we were very closely tied to the Blue Angels, and they, parts for the airplanes and a lot of mechanical work and instructors. I mean, the Blue Angels had 2 guys killed right in one of their pilots was killed, and then they took one of our instructors to replace him, and then, boy, within a month he was killed, and they sent another guy. He must have been killed too, because then they sent a friend of mine who was still a student, but he was just about to graduate, and he survived. Hal Loney. Then he ended up flying for Delta later.
Did they give you any second thoughts at the time, like all these guys going down about, gee, what am I going to be doing with myself? No. Didn't worry you?
I mean, I wasn't fearless, but it just wasn't a concern.
Yeah.
Really. I just kind of did what I was supposed to do. I remember on my first solo flight in the F-9, which was it was a World War II plane, but the wings had been swept back. And we had that in the advanced jet training in Beeville before I had the F-11. And I remember one time making an approach, and I'm by myself, and the instructors on the ground coaching me, sort of, because I think it was my first solo or something.
Wow.
And I'm turning in and getting too close to the ground, and instead of leveling out and pulling up, I'm pulling more around, so I'm just going down. Anyway, I mean, there's things that happen, but I survived it, and I learned a good lesson.
And how'd you end up? You ended up flying A4s, Skyhawk. How'd you end up on that plane? And can you talk about the transition from that period and moving on to actually getting into the war?
Vietnam had really heated up by the time flight training was a year and a half long. So Vietnam had really heated up, and so we knew what was going on then as far as people. I mean, they were must pumping people. That's what they called it. That was like Robin Wood, who they were pushing people through the program as fast as they could get them, because the pilots were getting killed, getting shot down, captured and stuff. So it was kind of a rush deal, and they sent you to a squadron. They sent you to the recovery air group, they call it RAG. And so they sent me to Lemoore, and then they had a training squadron for A4s.
Lemoore, California. Yeah.
So I learned to fly the A4. I'd already learned just the jets, basic flying, but learned to fly the A4 there, and then lo and behold, it was off on a cruise.
And your first cruise?
First cruise.
Which ship was that?
Ticonderoga.
Yeah, in 1967?
Yep. End of 1967.
How many missions did you end up flying in Vietnam?
220.
So do you recall, doesn't have to be the first one, but can you describe what your initial, your first cruise, your first few flights, what was that like? What were you overwhelmed? Were you feel well prepared? What was that like back then?
It's such a for me it was just a real mixture of feelings and emotions. I mean, I just loved it. I loved the flying. I didn't love being gone. From.
What'd you love about the flying?
Oh, it's just like having a toy, super. It wasn't supersonic, but a jet toy. Strapped on your back or something. You just had your own little toy. I mean, it was so maneuverable, and it would just do so many things. We could dogfight with the fighters, the F-8s on the ship, and beat them, get behind them, which they would just kill them. I mean, they just could.
And I think the A4. The A4 is the plane that Tom Skerritt flew, the MiGs in Top Gun. I think, right? Wasn't that the plane they used in Top Gun as the enemy fighter?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just a very maneuverable, fast, capable airplane. It would just do all kinds of things, And the Blue Angels flew it for years, so it was a real good formation airplane. And so, so the flying itself was just fun. I mean, I remember Jack Arduino and I, he was a year ahead of me in the cruise. So my first cruise was his second, and I was his wingman one time, and we went out, just the two of us, and looking for trucks on a highway and trying to hit them, because they were taking supplies to the Viet Cong. And we dropped our bombs or shot our rockets or whatever we did, and then we had about 30 minutes. We got through early, had about 30 minutes before the Charlie time, which is what time they start recovering airplanes back on the carrier. And so we had taken our cameras, and we had switched cameras, like 8mm cameras. So we took our helmets off and we're flying formation. I'm flying with my knees. I'm taking pictures of Jack.
Yeah.
Right there. He's taking pictures of me. And we looked down, and we were over land. Well, it turned out it wasn't China, but it was communist China controlled area of Taiwan. And a guy had just gotten shot down there the day before.
Oh gosh.
Who just wandered over it, like what we were doing, because we weren't paying attention to where we were exactly. So I had some stories like that, funny stories, and then some really horror stories.
I mean, you don't just share horror stories, but
they're not really horror.
Well, but a couple of just what that felt like to be. What was that like? Have you told stories in the past about the telephone poles looking like coming up at you, and what was that like when you were over there? What were you doing over there, by the way? What was your mission generally?
Well, of course, that was one of the complicating factors of the war, because you couldn't. It didn't appear to be being fought to win necessarily, because we were restricted on our targets so much. But on the other hand, I mean, we bombed airfields, but like I never bombed in Hanoi or Haiphong, because they had stopped the bombing above the 23rd parallel. So very likely wouldn't be here if we had done that, because it was really hot and heavy. But like, for example, my first Alpha strike, which is when they combine the airplanes on 3 or 4 ships, and you go in, a whole bunch of them, like 80 airplanes or something, and it's all planned. And we went in on an Alpha strike to bomb Vinh Airfield. It was just a very critical airfield that they used in North Vietnam. And I remember when I rolled in, the bullets, only the tracers, I could only see the tracers, were just coming at me like somebody squirting a water hose at me. It was just like, I couldn't believe I wasn't being hit, because for every tracer I could see, there were like 4 or 5 bullets that I couldn't see. So they had me locked on the radar. This is not an unusual thing. And so I broke off the bombing run and went around to another side of the circle, sort of, and did it again, dove in again and dropped my bombs. And then, everybody's screaming on the radio, and it's just nuts. So I remember on that particular one, F-8 reconnaissance plane, which is it's a F-8 Crusader, which is a supersonic jet, flew over the target after we had bombed, going like 500 knots right over the target, taking pictures, click, and a SAM hit him, killed him. He didn't eject. So,
how many? You lost. I know of names and people I wish I'd known, but when you take stock of your friends and colleagues and folks you knew at the Naval Academy, then also squadron when you were flying, how many, or how would you choose to answer about folks who were shot down or killed, or and I know that was a rough, horrible time that way, but how many of your friends didn't make it?
Well, I really couldn't give you a number, because so many of them were killed and preparing to go to Vietnam. We weren't necessarily shot down. I mean, gosh, I could list name after name. My roommate, one of my best friends, went submarines, and his submarine, USS Scorpion, went down in the North Atlantic, and they didn't find it for a year. And there was talk about whether the Russians had done something, or whether a torpedo had exploded in the chamber on the ship, on the sub. So, but then it's just hope. I couldn't tell you how many, but there's a bunch of people that I know or knew pretty well. Some close, some not so close, but still we were together that died. I didn't really know many people that were captured personally. Phil Butler lived down the street from us, in Lemoore. And this is what was so scary about you when I left 9 days before you were born and didn't see you for 8 months. Phil left 3 weeks before his daughter was born, and he was captured. He was a POW for 6 years. So he didn't see his daughter for 6 years. It's just brutal. So it was a real war with a lot of sadness. But
well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about this is another one. I don't mean to prompt family stories, but I talked just briefly about meeting your wife, my mom, and then I love hearing about I love the story, and I may have it wrong, but checking out the airplane in Lemoore and flying to Lubbock, Texas. You just quickly talk about that, or not quickly.
Well, after my second cruise, I was getting out of the Navy in a few months, and they put me in a squadron, an instruction squadron, a training squadron. So I was training people, but they also wanted us to keep our hours up, flying. So we could just get an airplane when there was one available, and go spend the night somewhere. Just go
fly it wherever.
Yeah, just fly.
Check out an A4.
Just get some hours. So I guess that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Just can you run through? We'll just kind of continue the bio here. How you met Nina, and then family situation flying off, and then we'll move on to the 70s.
I was still in Beeville, finishing up Beeville advanced flight jet training, and I went home over Christmas holidays, I guess it was. And while I was there, I can't remember the day in relation to Christmas, but a good friend of mine had a date with Nina, and he's the guy that I would, when I was in Beeville, he was at the University of Texas, and I would go spend the night on his couch most weekends, and he'd get me dates. So we were pretty close friends, and so I'd go to Lubbock to see my parents, and he calls up, and I guess he called me. I don't know. We talked. So he had a date with Nina, and I didn't know that. And Nina was just the little sister of a guy my age who was a friend, but not a close friend. But she was just the little sister, and I'd never known her as a grown up. And so the guy brought her by. He had told her, "Do you want to go?" He had asked her, "Do you want to go by and see a friend of mine who's going to Vietnam and going to be killed?" And that's apparently what he said to her. He said, "Oh no, who's that?" Johnny Thompson. "Oh, sure, we can go see him." So, being the good friend that I was to Johnny Sims, he had to go back supposedly to Texas to study for something, and I'm still in Lubbock. So I called her and asked Nina to go out. And then on our second date, I suggested that maybe we should get married. And to her credit, she said no. But we did get married.
And you took her out to Lemoore and then left on a cruise?
Well, it's funny,
But Lemoore is probably one of the only places in the country at that point that would have made Lubbock look like a big city.
Yeah. But it's funny. I mean, what won her heart, what finally put her over the edge, I think, was when I had her come visit out in Lemoore, and she loved going through the guard, the sentry, the guard guy at the gate, because he's a Marine, and he'd do some big fancy salute and salute her, and she thought that was so cool. And then I also had a flight suit. And in my flight suit, I used to look cool. And I think that's what put her over the edge.
Yeah. So you had Mandy, and then I was born on that, I guess, the second cruise. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you survived those cruises, and you end up going to work for Delta Airlines. How did that happen, and where'd you go from there? I know I ended up becoming a Hank Aaron Atlanta Braves fan.
Oh boy, that was
because everything.
That was something. Because when I was getting out, the airlines really weren't hiring for the most part.
This is 1970.
Mm-hmm. And I was in the dentist's office, and they were doing something terrible to me, to my teeth. And your mother came out and ran into a friend of ours outside the dentist's office and said, "Delta's hiring." And so immediately she told me, as soon as she could, told me. And so I submitted an application, and they said they didn't want to hear from me, that they don't have any slots open. And so I checked out an A4 and flew to Atlanta and walked in the employment office and said, "I sent in an application, and y'all said you couldn't see me quite yet, but I'm here. Could I talk to someone?" And they had me talk to the head of the employment office there, and hired me. And it turned out to be the last class they hired for 2 years, and I was like five from the bottom in the whole seniority list for Delta, the whole country, and we were all sent to Miami. The five of the five bottom guys who were in that class were sent to Miami. Lived in Fort Lauderdale,
and
that's where things really started changing in my life in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good had already happened, but
What? So you were married at that point. You moved to South Florida, and I know that when you got a job with Delta, you had a lot of side jobs and other things going on. So, what did change in your life at that point for the better? What was what was going on?
I was not a Christian, but I thought as a good American, particularly having just come back from Vietnam, I needed to take my family to church. So we started going to a church that the guy who was one number senior to me in my class with Delta had recommended. And it was Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. And they had an evangelistic program. And I loved the minister. I didn't have any idea what he was talking about, but he was just a good speaker, Jim Kennedy. So I made an appointment during the week with the minister, and I assumed it'd be Kennedy. Well, they had seven ministers. I didn't know how churches worked. And so I met with another guy, another minister there, and I asked him if they would ask for prayer for the POWs. We were writing letters to Hanoi, to Paris, Hanoi, and trying to get the POWs released and all that stuff. So I asked if they would put something in the bulletin maybe and ask for prayer and help with that. And so he agreed to do all that, and he did do it. And then he said, "Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?" I said, "No." And he said, "Have you come to the place in your spiritual life where you know for certain that you're going to heaven?" And I said, "Yeah," with a question mark, real definitive. And then he said, "Suppose you died tonight and you stood before God," and he said, "Why should I let you into my heaven?" And I thought for a minute. I said, "Faith?" with a question mark. Yeah. And I knew I'd been raised in a church, but it wasn't a very good church. So anyway, he just explained the gospel to me, and your mother had done that for years. She was a Christian, and God just hadn't changed my heart yet, but he did that day. And I remember right before that here I am, I survived Vietnam. I got a cute little, sweet little family, got a good job, all that. But I was lacking peace. That's what I tell your mother. I just don't have peace, and I don't know what that meant exactly. I just don't have peace. And it's funny, when I prayed with this guy to receive Christ, to put my trust in Him for my salvation, that He paid for my sins. And this a physical peace came over me that I have never felt before, and I've never felt it since. Just overwhelming. And I'm not real big on signs or anything, but it was a sign of some kind. So anyway, I remember telling your mother not too long before that because when you start going to this church, they start visiting you, coming to your house, and she knew the day that they would come. It was like on a Thursday or something. So every Thursday, she'd get the house all cleaned up for them to come, and then they wouldn't come. And then lo and behold, I meet with this guy at church. He leads me to the Lord, and we kind of anyway. It's just funny because then somebody visited, and he said, "Well, you're too late." I remember telling your mother that I couldn't imagine like a Friday night at home doing having a Bible study or something, with no alcohol and no. It's not really about alcohol, but no alcohol and no religious stuff. Just have a good time. And then before I knew it, we were having a Bible study at our house. It's just amazing. I mean, he really changed me. I got a long ways to go still, but he changed. It's dramatic changes in my life. So.
Well, I want to hear more about that, and but I want to make sure we get through some other things. I'm curious, how would you describe South Florida in the 70s? What was your experience there? So you were there about 8 or 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? I was a kid, so I thought it was perfect. No shirt, no shoes, lots of swimming pools, the beach. It was pretty perfect for me. But 1970s in South Florida, what was that like for you and the family? In your view or your recollection, just broad brushstrokes.
I guess really because of the church and getting involved in that, we had our world. It was where we were at home, sort of. Your mother never liked it, and she liked the church, but she didn't like the South Florida. She just didn't think it was very pretty, and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. It's just an interesting place because it was just swarming with Northerners, and that was really weird. And it's just funny. I'm going to back up and say one thing. When I went to the Naval Academy, straight from Lubbock, it's like I spoke a different language. I mean, people could not understand me in a lot of words. I remember in the store asking for some tape. Some tape. I don't know what I was asking. They said, tape? T-A-P-E, tape. Tape?
Yeah.
And I just thought, my gosh, where are these people from? It was me that was the weird one.
Right.
And so the same thing sort of happened in Florida, and then because they're all Northerners, seems like down there. And then flying, we merged with Northeast Airlines, and they had their own accent. And this probably isn't what you're looking for, but this is what they couldn't say Delta. They say Delta.
Oh.
Delta 197, so. And they couldn't say Delta.
Yeah.
Most of them could not say Delta. They could only say Delta.
Mm-hmm.
So that was funny. But I don't know. It was so much had changed for the good there that I think I really liked it. I think your mother didn't like it. She was happy about the good,
mm-hmm.
But we were.
What airplanes were you flying at the time?
Glad to get out of there, actually.
Yeah. What airplanes? What airplanes were you flying that decade?
I was a flight engineer on a Convair 880. I was a co-pilot on a DC-9. Flight engineer on the 727. Co-pilot on the 727, engineer on the DC-8. I think that's probably about it. I didn't fly captain until we left Fort Lauderdale.
And you so went to Dallas, and a couple of significant things, obviously moving to Dallas, and then you were diagnosed with cancer. That would have been, I think, 1980. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny looking back on it. So you're only 10 years in. You ended up flying for Delta for 30. So 10 years in. Can you talk about that, just about the diagnosis and the treatment and how you dealt with that?
Well, I was probably in the best shape of my adult life, you know, just condition-wise. I was running and lifting weights and all that stuff, so it was quite a shock. And had this major surgery, and they removed all my lymph nodes below my diaphragm.
It started with, it was testicular cancer, right? Yeah.
And they found some in there, so they thought they'd gotten it all, and it showed up in my lung 3 months later, and then that required chemotherapy. Chemotherapy like to kill me. It was so severe. I broke ribs, throwing up, you know, so you know, it's pretty rough. But
I remember you were a good sport. You'd let me pull hair out of your head sometimes just to entertain me. I don't know if you remember that. I don't have the luxury.
Is that you that was doing it? Yeah. Confession. This is not about me, but I really was a real Christian then. I mean, I remember how. I mean, I was pretty happy. I mean, it's pretty miserable. I mean, the shot, they kept sticking me with things. Oh, he's hurt, and it's awful. But I remember just thinking, you know, live or die, I'll be okay. I don't want to die because I got a family and all that, but live or die, I'm okay. So I was always really relatively cheerful. And I remember one time, a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but probably about 10 doctors and social workers asked me to come into a conference room and tell them what I think about things or something, you know, because they thought I was just acting and being happy, you know. I wasn't happy about the cancer, but it was just cheerful. It was the cancer ward that had just opened up at Presbyterian Hospital, so they had not had a cancer ward. So they got me in this room, circled around me, and I'm in one of those hospital gowns. I've got an IV that I'm pushing, and they just really wanted to know what's wrong with me.
Why you're so cheerful?
How I could be cheerful, yeah. And it wasn't giddy cheerful, but I was just kind of happy, you know. And I just said, well, it's Jesus, you know. God has saved me, and so I know I'm okay regardless. But it was interesting, and I'm not pointing to myself and telling that story, but because I really was at peace, you know. So.
Well, also significantly, while you were at Presbyterian, JR got shot, and I think he was there also.
Yeah.
I don't know, Becca, if you know JR. That would be Dallas. I hope somebody listening knows who that is. The show Dallas. J.R. Ewing got shot, and he was at Presbyterian.
Yeah, they filmed an episode or more than an episode.
Yeah. So I rode up in the elevator with
Bobby
and Victoria Principal was her character. She was tiny, I remember. Yeah. Anyway, Larry Hagman.
Well, they were filming it while I was there, and they had.
Yeah.
Well, it was really funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So you ended up flying. You recovered, right? I mean, so obviously you, and then
Yes.
after the chemotherapy, so you've been in remission for. That's actually hard to believe. Almost 40 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was one that doesn't really go into remission. It either kills you or they kill it.
Yeah.
And they killed it after 5 years. If it hadn't shown up again, they determined it.
Yeah. Lance Armstrong, I guess, had the same thing, and they treated. I don't know how different the treatments are. It seems like.
I don't think he had the surgery. I think they had decided not that the surgery wasn't necessary. The big. Surgery.
Mm-hmm. So you retired in 2000. When would that have been? 2000.
Technically 2003, January 1st.
Okay, I thought it was 2003. Okay.
But I flew my last flight like December 5th or something. Because I couldn't fly past the 6th because that's my birthday.
Yeah. And I remember we got into some general aviation. You flew a Cirrus. We had some fun experiences. I'll tell one. We were going up, and the plane kept stalling out. Remember that one?
Uh-huh.
We were about 12,000 feet. and I fly all the time. And my thought was, it doesn't really occur to you how precarious, or what a precarious position you're really in until the engine stalls. You look outside and you say, for the first time, you realize it really is not very normal to be at 12,000 feet. And anyway, I'll tell this to Becca, but the funny thing, he kept stalling. And anyway, finally figured out it had to do with basically the choke, right? It was get the oil engine, the gas flow. And then we got it under control, and I certainly was concerned. My dad, handled it like a pro. And then we got it stabilized and flying, and then he paused and turned to me and said, "Don't tell your mother." That was fun. And the other funny thing I'll just share was, so I remember you ended up, we didn't get to the 777, but the 777, you flew that. And I remember.
And I flew the 767.
As a captain, right? Yeah, and moved up.
Yeah.
I want to tell one quick story after, but.
And the MD-88.
Yeah.
Captain.
What was your favorite airplane in hindsight?
Well, 777, I guess, because it was so
massive.
It's just so unusual, and so technology was so advanced.
Yeah.
But.
And you were flying out of JFK, right?
Mm-hmm. And Atlanta. Mm-hmm. But you could, some of the other, like the DC-9 and those airplanes, you could zip around in them a little more. It's more like the A4 flying, but that 777 was just really fabulous.
Well, I remember going out on a sleeting, snowy day, and you and I were going to fly to Paris, and I got put up front. I got to sit in first class, but I'd come out in a limo with my clients, and got to go back behind the scenes with you, and that had been like 98, 99. So I was a banker and thought I was on top of the world there. And I remember sitting down. I had a seat on the left-hand side of the airplane, and it was snowing and wet and icing, and I thought, "You sure you know how to do this?"
Yeah.
Which is a funny thing to.
That's a good question.
Well, I could sit here and reminisce and prompt you and so many fun things, and I actually might circle around on a couple of things, but we're here because, for a lot of reasons, and I wanted you here just because I think you've had such a full life. I, of course, love you and, think you're amazing and all the things you've done, but I had this idea to do breakfast at Stinsons, and, we've had tough times and other things, getting Stinsons off the ground and doing all that, but one of the things that I've always thought about, and I think I probably, it's funny the things you pick up, and I'm sure that a lot of my worldview and things I've read, I think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Gulag Archipelago and Jonathan Edwards and John Gerstner and R.C. Sproul and then Herman Melville and all the literature, and I think how much of that, really is a result of being in the home that I was in, and the curiosity and wanting to learn, wanting to read. And so one of the things that we thought about was, with this podcast, was how little thought people, and I think about children, but not just children, adults as well, how little thought people give to why we do the things we do. How do we make decisions? Recently I had someone on who just has an amazing stories. I'm a Jewish guy and talked about his father who survived the Holocaust, and I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by all things Jewish, and I joke about some things, but the Talmud is really handy. I think about the guide for living and how do you live your life and what do you do, but Old Testament literature, and there's a lot of but it's not just the Bible. It's people have been grappling with this since the beginning of time. Life is a vapor, here today, gone tomorrow, from dust to dust. This is not something, and obviously Christianity has its own answer, response to that. But you still have to, even as a Christian or anybody, you have to make a call. Hey, why am I going to do this as opposed to that? How am I going to use my time? I actually just read something, and I referred to this in my other conversation. I read this book, Rabbi on 84th Street, and he had the rabbi had such an interesting comment talking about surviving the Holocaust, and he said, that the Germans, he never understood this notion of being, chosen like as an Aryan, and he said, it sounds so difficult. You have to have like the perfect nose and the perfect chin and the perfect color hair and the perfect build. And he said, we Jews, it's much simpler. We were chosen, but I think people don't understand. It's not like we were chosen to be better. We were chosen clearly for good and bad, and anybody can be a Jew. That was a quote. And he said, what we were chosen for was to study Torah, which is, the Torah is the Bible, the Old Testament, of course. And my point is not to get into theology here, but I thought, man, that was so interesting. He said, the devout Jew was chosen to study Torah. And Torah comes from the word light, O-R-A-H, and it's God's word. And so a devout Jew was chosen to study Torah. And you have to take, then I read this, something that went along with this, but you have to take breaks to sleep and to eat and to earn a living and to do other things. But those are breaks from your primary purpose, which is to study Torah, which is how you know God, which is how you learn what you're here for, and all these kinds of things. So I thought that was interesting because I get the sense when I talk to people that, not even getting to the question of the meaning of life or Monty Python or anything, but it's sort of like, what do we do with our time? And how do we decide, how we allocate our time while we're here? And so it's interesting to hear you talk about when you were a kid. It's kind of like, do you want to go to the Naval Academy? Sure. And my oldest, your grandson, and I hate to pick on him because I'm not picking on him. He knows how much I love him. And I was, like this as well. And I still am like it a lot of times. But we talked about, this concert he was going to, and I've shared this story more than once. But he said, this question of why are you going to go? And the answer is, I don't know. And so I said, great. I'm not going to tell you can't go, but I want you to think about this now. And as you get older, I hope you get to a point where you say, why am I doing this? Is it edifying? Is it beneficial? Is there a reason I'm doing it? Is it? And someone we were talking to, Chad Aller, was talking about how he has buckets in his life, and he's got faith and family and fun and business, whatever. And he puts things in buckets as he organizes his life. What are your thoughts on how you decide, and it can be a deep or it can be a superficial. You got to make decisions like, well, I'm going to get up, or I'm going to go exercise, or I'm going to invest this, but how do you make decisions? Like, how do you organize your life, and how would you contrast it with what it was like when you were a kid, and I love the fact that we've talked to folks who are kind of midlife, got a business going. We haven't touched on your Parkinson's yet, and how you're, but I would like to talk about that briefly. But can you just talk about how you make decisions? How do you organize your life? How did you organize? How have you organized? How do you think about prioritizing? And I remember your lists, lots and lots of lists, blue ink and endless lists of things to do. So I know you did tactically. That's how you approach some things. But if you could just speak for a minute about decision-making and organizing.
I don't really have to make decisions anymore because I have your mother, and I also have an iPhone. So
artificial intelligence.
Well, it is funny. I mean, this Parkinson's is really a hindrance to normal living, and yet it has caused me to focus on things that are important, and the Lord Jesus, and living for God and glorifying and enjoying God. But it's helped me to do that. And it's interesting. Fanny Crosby, who Fanny Crosby is, the hymn writer, the lady who was blind, a doctor when she was young caused her blindness by some bad procedure. And she, looking back over her life, she said, I wouldn't accept sight if it was given to me, because I'm afraid it would distract me from the beauty of the Lord. And she ain't just talking. She means it. And it's the same with Johnny Erickson, Johnny Tata. She's just, I've heard her say, of course I'd love to be. She's paralyzed, I'd love to be well. I'd love to not have this, but in a way, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade it for health, because I never would have known God like I do because of this. So, like one of Jonathan Edwards' resolutions is to never do anything that you would not be willing to do if you knew you only had 1 hour left to live. Nothing you would do in that 1 hour. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I guess more and more my life has just become focused on knowing Him, knowing the Lord, and studying and praying every day, and really letting it sink in that He really is my rock and my salvation, my refuge, and to wait in silence for Him only, and He's faithful. And here we are in the middle of a possible move, which is extremely disruptive, particularly at our age with the ailments we have, and so much to do. So it's just overwhelming, and yet the Lord has. We've just told Him, we think this is what we're supposed to do, but you can shut the doors, you can open the doors, but it's not like just serendipity where I'm just going to throw it out there and whatever happens, happens. But I do believe strongly in the providence of God, and that He does rule. He works all things according to the counsel of His will. And so, looking to Him, and like the chief end of man, is glorifying God and enjoying Him forever. And so, it really all starts and ends with God in a sense. And that's how I look at it now. The biggest priority for me every day is to at least read a psalm and pray. It's been so busy because of what we're doing, this possible move, and we've just been consumed. And so I just try to make it a point to spend some time in the Bible, reading at least a psalm, and praying every morning, for direction and everything, and that we glorify Him in whatever we do. So,
what would your counsel be to somebody? Let's say head of a husband, wife with kids and jobs and all that stuff. Where you are today, looking back, and got to earn a living. Colleges cost $50,000 a year, or $100,000 a year, whatever. It's crazy. What would your counsel be to find that balance, right? Of you got to pay the bills. You just like you said, you got to deal with things like you're going to move. What would your counsel be to somebody and who's sort of at a midlife, let's say, with kids and job and obviously trying to balance, knowing what you know and knowing what you believe? What would your counsel be to how you manage that?
Well, it depends entirely on whether they're a Christian or not, I must say, because God is the first priority, and I don't really like the bucket theory too much. I'm not critiquing somebody that believes that. It just never worked for me. Like, you got family and you got this, and you got in the different buckets. Because in my opinion, it's all one bucket. It all has to do with just simply assuming your responsibility day by day for the things you need to do, and praying that God will direct you and provide. And almost every time I have a meal, besides just a prayer that we say for the family, or I thank God for the sandwich, and ask Him. He can provide $1 million for a house. And I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but He can provide. He can make the house deals close. He can take care of other financial issues. He can, I do what I'm supposed to do, but I thank Him. It's just as easy for Him to split the Red Sea as it is for Him to provide a sandwich for me. And that's how I want to look at things, and that's how I'd recommend anybody look at things. But it doesn't remove your responsibility to do what you're supposed to do each day, minute by minute. but you're doing it, you know, like, I mean, we know a young man, both of us know a young man who is very ambitious, and very ambitious because he knows what it's like to have money, because he's seen other people that have money, and so he wants money, and he's going to do what he thinks will provide that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that unless God is excluded from it, because, you know, I mean, the Bible is just full of stuff about, you know, the rich man. I mean, the rich man who focuses on his riches, you know, he's going to crumble. He's going to have to stand before God one day. So, I mean, my advice to anybody is just get down on your knees and beg God to save you first, and to direct your steps, and then you just get up the next morning and do what you're supposed to do. You know, I think in most cases it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming. It's kind of funny to be thanking my dad, but I thank you as your son and also as the host of Breakfast at Stinsons. I love listening to you and talking about this stuff, and so I'm glad you could come, and good providence with the move.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you for